life in Germany before the war. Now, I was born in '93 in a small town, Effenbach, near Kaiserslautern. Effenbach was an agricultural town with a lot of farming going on, and also part of a university town. It was sort of what you might call very idyllic and very peaceful. If you were to ask me questions about when I was 3 or 4, how it was, I probably could give you only one version, and that's the version I was born into. I knew nothing else. There wasn't one thing. I played, I sang, I praised the state. You know, the state was all father, mother, everything. And then mother and father came and the relatives. But everything I did, even as a small child, was, it must benefit the state. Otherwise, it's nothing. Otherwise, I'd be punished. So that was my beginning in life. And I clearly remember my life was always full with noises, loudspeakers going off on a 24-hour basis, you know. Always the message come out. I mean, you could not escape. But in between that, we had moments with friends where we played. But even the play was organized within small groups, like what you need, kindergarten or daycare. It wasn't what I've seen here. No, it was all politically involved. All indoctrination. You have to remember, from the day you were born, indoctrination process began. You were groomed to serve and obey the state, and that was that. In anything. There was no room for saying, no, I don't want to. You did what they said. So that was my life, my early life. The life with the family was the one thing. I came from my mother was from a large family, and the extended family all lived in town, which was wonderful. So it was only in that small group I got some happiness, you know, real happiness, and feel safe and be loved, and that was the extended family, and I can't complain about it. They were always there, up to a point. They could not talk in front of me. It was very dangerous to talk, because there was always a danger that my loyalty won out to the state, and I heard something my aunt would say, or my mother would say, or my father, I report in school or daycare the next morning. That was my job, you know. Anyone was trained like that. So they were all very much aware of it, the adults, and did not want to get their kids into trouble. So they just kept their mouths shut when it came to politics. Very numb, you know, very sort of more play, reading stories to the kids, fairy tales, and they kept everything this wrong. Absolutely nothing, politics was not mentioned. So that's one way we got through that. The living itself, when I think back, was extremely safe, peaceful. My family was there. I couldn't say there was any cruelty, because I couldn't compare. Was that cruelty or was it not? It was all I knew, and to me that was normal. But the normality I saw was not frightening, okay, as a child. I mean, it wasn't frightening, it was all right. So, yeah. There was, of course, some of the problems emerged, particularly with my parents. My mother's father came from Italy. He was from Rome. And he had a practicum. He was an engineer in Germany. Remember, the two were allies, Italy and Germany. And he met my grandmother there and married her and remained there. My father's family came from France. So they also, both of these, they married German wives and remained in Germany. That was fine, apparently, up to the day when Hitler came in. It wasn't fine then. A re-indoctrination had to take place with my mother and her family, my father, and they were not considered perfect Aryans, that famous word, and loyal to the state, because they're probably loyal to Rome. You know, all this went over and over with friends too. So they were under constant supervision. Had to be very careful what they said. And it bothered me tremendously that my parents were not 100% German. As a child, it really bothered me, you know. And today I look back and say, this is crazy, but that's how it was. Yeah. It's very hard to give you an explanation. Why would you do that? Why? I knew nothing else. Okay, the answer is always the same. I knew nothing else. And the state was very, very careful not to let any different ideas come in. There was no such thing as someone being called at school, did a presentation. No, that was too dangerous. It was only, everything was presented by their own people in their own way, their own version. So that I learned one version. I thought Germany was the world. I knew of no other nation, nothing, absolutely nothing. I knew no writers or musicians, nothing. I knew only Goethe, Bach, Beethoven, you know, and that was it. That was Germany, okay, and nothing else existed outside. So in that realm of my parents, they suffered. My father particularly. In 33, when he was a, what you call, I think in English, a controller, like an accountant, sort of. Yeah, in a municipality. Okay, he was a socialist. His father was a socialist. Okay, he was approached to join the party. He said, "I'm a socialist. I've always been socialist." Fine, you're fired. Bang, he was fired. The same day spot from his job. And luckily he had an uncle who had a big construction business and he just worked for him. But that wasn't the end of it, you know. They got him again just shortly before 39. He was barely finished training and he was immediately sent towards the east, the Eastern Front in Poland. You know, he had no choice. No. That's where he went and that's where he stayed. There were means and ways without killing the people to punish them when they didn't fit the picture. Okay? So he spent most of his time then in the Crimea, you know, up in Russia. And luckily made it out before Stalingrad because he was wounded and was sent out to Austria. But that was his mother. My mother, she looked Italian. Very, very dark, you know, olive skin. There was always, she had to be, she was the kind of woman, was a very spiritual woman, and she couldn't see anyone suffer. She would see prisoners come down the street, and she said, they look hungry. And she would take some bread and sandwiches out and give it to them. And she was warned. She said, when this happens again, you go to jail. We had to beg her to stay inside because we were worried something would happen. She had no rights, you know. She couldn't say too much. You're not German. Yet she was born in Germany, her mother was German, but she was not considered German. So she learned very quickly to be quiet because she knew I needed her, we needed each other. My father by then was gone. That's the only one I had. I had the extended family, but my mother. So it was just a whole, you got used to it. Okay, it was not a sort of situation where you had sleepless nights over. You just compromised and you just adapted, and then you were fine. No one touched you. So that was what before the war. I had a relatively happy childhood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Crystal. All I remember, and that is very clear in my mind, was like everything was on fire. The whole village was burning, you know, and everyone was running and screaming. We all went out there. So, but what it was a downtown area with shops, and there were the shops belonged to many of the Jewish people, and they were attacked with fire-bombs and burned down, and people arrested, you know, and dragged away in trucks, you know, trucks. And that was the first time I was frightened. I was terrified because I didn't understand what was going on. These were the people I knew. They were going to school with me, you know, the children were going to school with me. They were German people. And it didn't choose, so what, they're German. And that's for the first time. I was about 5.5, 6 years, I was frightened. Because I didn't understand. And not understanding made me scared, okay? Didn't make sense. It was the beginning of very slowly beginning to ask questions as I got older. So that was, yeah. And then?
So why don't we, before we move into the war period, why don't we have people, if they have any questions about sort of pre-war, we're going to, like I say, take it in 3 stages, but people have questions about her impressions, maybe Jews in her community and so forth, anything regarding the period before the war, please do ask if you have any questions. Yeah, Sarah.
How was your view of like the Jewish people at that age? Like,
Yeah. What were your view of the Jewish people at that young age? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think about these things?
Well, my best friends, I went to kindergarten, these were Jewish, we walked to school, we played, you know, they were just like everyone else. And I went to their house with the friends who had sleepovers, just like you do, you know, it was just, they were people I liked. They were German people, growing up in the same village I did. And like I said, it was there where the first time my thoughts began to go. I began to wonder, you know. I was too young to internalize. I mean, I wasn't cognitive developed to put everything together, you know. That would come later. But I wondered, you know, how come they haven't done anything? Did they break? I had impressions like, did they commit a crime? Hit a bank or something like that? No. But they were treated like criminals, and I didn't understand. I did not. I liked them, did not hate them, they were my friends. So, some were teachers. One of my doctors, who apparently delivered me, and delivered many children in our village, people loved him. We got our shots from him, you know. How can you hate him? It is, in this time, I think, I would say the first mistakes were made. Because I think he underestimated some of the people, what he believed. You know, sometimes government has a tendency, because I'm in power. The people wanted me to be there. That gives me the right to do anything I want. But it didn't. There was a slow, silent resistance again. People disappeared in our village, but they didn't disappear by the Nazi, because they came back later on, again after the war. People got actively involved, and there was like an underground, and no one knew who was involved, was too dangerous. No one knew the contact was. They just went. And our doctor disappeared overnight, and some of our teachers, whole families, they were gone, okay? And later we found them again. When they came back, they never stayed, but they came back again, just to see the village. So there was a certain amount of things going on that was very quietly and silently going on, and I didn't know that much about it. I just they went to school, and some kids were gone. Then other parts of the class, where children disappeared, they never came back. They were arrested. The family was arrested for some reason or another by the Gestapo, loaded on a truck or put in the marketplace and shot, or the whole family shot. No trial, no nothing. And so we never heard. We knew they had died, and that's all. That's it.
Any other questions about before the war? Yes.
Germany is one of the first countries to come out of the Depression at the time. And did
Yeah.
you and your family have any recollections of?
Yes, but that comes, I was of course very young. That comes directly, there were many questions asked, why? You know, why? And people trying to understand, why did we go along? And I remember it was in the year 1933, Germany, like some of the other countries, people had been starving for years. The Versailles Treaty didn't help, you know, our resources were hauled out, the depression had set in, and people had no jobs. I mean, you think we have a depression now, that was nothing compared to what it was in the 30s. So here is a man coming up, and his slogan was Arbeit, Arbeit, Arbeit. Everyone always heard it, jobs, jobs, jobs. Everyone will have a job. That was his big thing. And I will make sure that everyone can build a house, have a little chicken in the pot, and I will create a small car, which he did, called a Volkswagen. So the average person can drive a car. Now all these promises, can you imagine? People hearing that who've been out of work for 5, 6, 7 years, they said, okay. that is, research and historical data that had to be picked up in university in Germany. And there's a lot of that in Heidelberg, there's a lot of information that was collected. And yeah, it was understandable that frantic people who was out of work, saw their family staff, lost their home, lost everything. There's this Messiah coming, promising heaven on earth. Okay? But one thing he didn't do, he didn't tell us what it would cost. I know it's completely, he didn't tell us what the price would be for bringing him in and doing all these things. We believed, we wanted to believe. There were many people who didn't. But yeah, the circumstances were, I think they were all over the world. I did a lot of history, so I know that the recession, North America was affected very badly too. And I think war in North America brought them out too under Roosevelt. When the war began, people got work again and started working. It was a similar, not the same, but the idea, behind it. So Germany fell right into it. Everyone wanted a job. He went, job, on every side. Job. Sometimes I laugh a little bit like now when I see always the signs, job action. I say, oh, it's not like that, I get a little worried because I have these pictures and this vision of these promises. So, yeah, there were conditions. They were actually ripe for dissent. And then we dealt with, the German people were very upset about the Versailles Treaty. Too much of their resources were leaving the country because we paid reparation to France, we paid reparation to England, we paid reparation. So on top of that, with a recession, we were starving. Germany, just starving. If this answers your question.
So thank you.
Any other questions about, yeah?
When did you join the Young Maidens?
Okay, yeah, the Young Maiden. Now, there was a certain age, okay, I think it was 10, and it was called the BDM. Then that was compulsory to join. But I was in small groups from kindergarten on, grade 1, 2, and 3. I don't know, I don't think they had any official title, they were part of it. They were just sort of organized almost like a play group. But everything we played was connected with the state and what to do for the state. And, so I was involved in this group activity since I was 6 years old. But officially, the BDM, I was entering that by the age of 10. That would be grade 4. Yeah. Grade 10. Age 10, grade 4. Yeah.
What kind of things did you do?
Oh, yeah. Now, that was also no play. We did a lot of helping out the farmers, helping out women, families who had children, and the husband was in the war. We would go and help out, take care of the kids. Everything was laid out, what to do. A lot involved in farming. We spent hours in the field collecting potato bugs that had covered the potato plants, clearing that up hand by hand, one by one. And so everything I remember was organized in a way that whatever I did here would benefit the country. Okay? And that was good enough for me. I didn't miss going on a date or having a party. I didn't miss that because that didn't serve the state. This served the state, okay? Yeah, no fun looking back now, but that's how I didn't know it, okay, because of the way I grew up. I didn't know it. You, for instance, you probably would be very angry. You would not want to participate in something like that.
Okay, let's move into the war. Tell us, when did you realize that you were at war? What kind of things were happening in your community that indicated that war was either approaching or had begun?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my father was gone. Most of all the males in my family, from the age of 70 on, were gone. They were all drafted in the army. So that was one sign that, yeah, there was a war going on. They're all in the army, they're all fighting. But the real awareness came when the sirens went off. and we had air raid attacks. And they were 24 hours. During the daytime, the attacks came by the English and Canadian attacked with a daytime attack. At night, the Americans attacked. So there was never much of a break, you know, because we had some chemical industries in Kaiserslautern and some camps where the SS was stationed with the elite force, and the Allies have obviously found out where all these targets were. So they were hitting the targets, but we were also close to the targets that we got hit, of course, always hit. And it got so bad for us that we couldn't go to school anymore. We had in our town 2 mine shafts that were empty, that were not used anymore. So the people just moved into the mine shaft, what Coleman, like the equivalent of Coleman stoves and lanterns and sleeping bags, whatever you called sleeping bags in those days. And we lived in there. And I still have the memory of the ceiling always wet, the water always dropping down, you know, from the inside of this cave. And there we were, you know, sort of living there. It was so bad. School was out, we couldn't do much anymore. Just lived there, you know? Yeah, okay. The direct thing I had, as long as we were still able to school, I had a friend who lived maybe 2 houses away, and she would come to my door, and then we walked to school together. And one morning, like any other morning, I was maybe in grade 2, 7. All of a sudden, this one airplane, just one. It was not an attack, was no air raid, no siren, or one airplane. That shouldn't do anything. But that airplane came towards us. It came diving down and starting shooting, you know. And I grabbed her and I threw her and myself into the ditch. But she wasn't fast enough. They got her, you know, and she fell over me. And there I was for an hour until people came, holding their dead body in my arms of my friend. It's talking about nightmares. I knew there was war, and I knew there was an ugly, brutal war. That really did a lot of harm. So this was on. But the air raids were devastating. The civilians, our 40% of our village was wiped out. The cities after the war had lost half of their population. I mean, war then, air raids were not like now. So what? Civilians. They're foreign civilians. They're civilians, enemy civilians, get them. Okay? There was no, be careful with your targets that you don't hit the civilians. No. It was war, and war was war, and people died. Okay? Take it or leave it. That's war. Okay? So at the end of the war, we had lost almost 60% of the civilian population, and in order to get our economy going, we had to bring in 6 million foreign workers, because Germany could not have run its country anymore. It had no more people. That's what it was. But the war, yes, then the brutality, I knew of the war.
Have you met Hitler?
Yeah. One of the criteria, because you know how kids can be in school, you probably have up to a point experienced that too. I was never fully accepted because I was made fun of. I was not pure German. You know. No one touched me, but it hurts. What can hurt? And I always remember those words. So I came up with a solution. I said, I'm going to go better in anything, academics and sports, you name it. I will be better. I'll show you. And I did that. And I achieved. I succeeded. I got very good grades and very high top marks. And in sports, the same way. To a point where I had won in a competition that would, for our province, that would meet in, I think it was in Heidelberg area. Meet in Heidelberg where Hitler would come and decorate some of the winners of the various provincial games. Okay, I was one of those winners. And I of course, went there. And I remember him coming to me and shaking my hands and saying, "That's what we want German women to be." And that I remember clearly. Keep the good work up. Very nice. Someone would ask me, very nicely treated. He gave me my medal, and I was impressed, But that was my experience with Hitler.
Any questions about the war?
Yeah.
What were you guys told about the reasons for war?
What were you told as to why you were fighting this war?
Yeah, we were told that the Allies, what were then our allies, or in the English, American, Canadian, and some of the other European, were the enemies who wanted to destroy. The Versailles Treaty was the beginning of the destruction of Germany, and they would not rest until Germany was totally destroyed and divided up in pieces among the Allies. Well, that got the people a little angry. Okay, but you heard now, my father laughed, my mother laughed, not behind my back, they didn't believe that. But hey, that's all I heard. I heard nothing else. So I believed it, okay, that the Americans, the English, the British, the English, the French would come in and just move in, take everything away from us. So it was, for me, it was fearful. Fearful to lose everything, and maybe they would kill us, maybe they would kill my mother, All those fears, a 10-year, by that time I was 10 years old. A lot of fear, a lot of terrorizing us to a point where we said, oh, anything other than what we have now is dangerous. It's very difficult to explain, because to me it was normal, okay? Had I lived outside that system and come into the system, I would have probably rebelled, probably been shot, sort of. I couldn't have accepted that. But I knew nothing else. After the war, my goodness, I mean, there is more than Schiller and Goethe, there is more than Beethoven and Bach and Wagner. I was zeroing in on Hollywood. Wow, that was a beautiful world, with beautiful music, beautiful place. I thought, that's paradise. I knew nothing.
Any other questions about the war? Yeah?
Well, when did you realize that they were actually coming to help you in that Nazi zone?
Right. Like first contact. Can you tell them about the first contact when the Americans?
Yeah, the first contact, okay. We had the first American occupation coming in, and of course the first thing that was collect any weapons that you have. And my mother didn't know that much. We have a BB gun, I guess. We've got to give that to him. It was a little BB gun. So I went there. I saw this guy in uniform. I screamed. I screamed and screamed and screamed. I was terrified. And the poor guy, I still remember his face. My mother felt sorry for him. She said, "Be quiet, he doesn't hurt you. He just wants our BB gun." He looked like it shot really. I was terrified because I was convinced he'll kill me. And you could tell me any other thing. I believed he would kill me. So, that was my first encounter. A few years later, I married one. So, but that was my first encounter. And I would have been 11, going on 12. That was April. It was pretty frightening, and we had the most frightening experience. We had the original occupation, where the French came in, and they had a lot of Moroccan troops, and they kind of we were worried. They were worried. We had to be careful. The women especially had to be careful. They went a little wild in the occupied area, which is war. Again, war. That is part of war. Okay, but the Americans, we didn't have that. They did other things, but not. I don't recall any rapes and any attacks. Other things. They had things like, which were cruel too. We were starving, and we had our house was occupied because it was a more modern home by Americans, and we stayed with my aunt next door. So here were we kids, a couple of kids. They brought a wash tub out, and they filled the wash tub with food. We stood there and we stared at that food. It was, oh. And then someone came and poured a can of gasoline over and set it on fire. And burned up.
So why would they do that? Like, what would be the tactical advantage of this to instill discipline or something?
A sense of discipline, maybe someone who was very hurt inadvertently, who'd lost family members, you know, how these things go. Maybe it was a Jewish person who's lost most of their family. I don't know. But someone who tried to teach us a bit. And it took me a while. It was my mother who helped me to overcome that, who said, look, she was very much oriented in believing in people. She said, maybe these people who did that to you, who knows what was done to them? Who knows how they got hurt? War is so, that's why we don't want war anymore. That's why your generation has to make every effort not to militarize and build armies again in our country. Because it creates people who do things that they normally would never do. So that is the memory I have. I don't know. And it exactly may have been that. It may have been someone who lost a brother or lost a father. Who knows? But that happened. But that was rare. Okay? On the whole, we had, what I lived close by was a Canadian base, Air Force base, in Long, you know. They were decent people. You know, the Canadians and the Americans. We had no violence there. We followed the rules. The rules were laid out. We followed the rules, and it was okay.
Any one more question for the war period? I see time is ticking. Yeah. Perhaps. Okay. Yeah. Let's move into. Okay. Yeah.
Did you comprehend that you were being brainwashed?
Yes. At the time that you were being indoctrinated
No.
through all this, could you comprehend that? No.
I did not comprehend it. I only knew that after the war, and maybe in order to understand, I have to. When my father came back and he said, "We've got to do something before she ends up as a twisted adult." So they picked a school for me. It was a Catholic school, a very expensive school. It was in those days already $1,000 a month. Probably now $5,000. You know. But it was a school that had foreign teachers from every country in Europe. So I was taught by a Belgian nun, by a French nun, by an English nun, by an American nun, even Canadians we had there. So an international teaching. And they were incredible, you know. And how did they get through? They were very encouraging, the unconditional acceptance and love. And I think the one image I have from them was we were really hungry in the Red Cross. I'd send milk and buns. We got this every day, some buns and milk. And there was one girl who was still very, very hungry, and one of the sisters gave her bun to that girl. And 5 minutes later, she fainted dead away on the floor. She was hungry. It took that much to convince me. That much. It was that indoctrinated. It took that much to sit there and say, hey, if she can do that, there must be something more in life than that I must stop. That much. It was not easy to deprogramming. It took years. Years of hard work. Yeah.
How did you feel when you found out Hitler was dead?
Yes, the death of Hitler. Do you remember?
Yeah.
1945.
Yeah.
Well, how did you feel? Because you were probably already occupied by the time
Yeah.
Hitler died. So, do you remember how you felt at the time?
I remember saying, by that time also some of the messages had come out of the camp. And I remember saying, if you did that, unless the Allies lie to us, but if they don't lie, and you did that, you should be dead. That's what I. But there was that level of did they or didn't they. But I rationalized it in my mind. If you did such a thing, you deserve to die. And that was.
Okay, let's, I think, a really good time to talk about when the war's over, you're occupied,
Mhm.
and you learn definitively that the Nazis had committed the these atrocities
Yeah.
on the Jewish people and the Russian people for
Yeah,
that matter too. I mean, how did you find out, and what was your immediate reaction to that?
First of all, I didn't want to believe it. I did not want to believe it because I said, if we did that, we'll go down in history as the most murderous race that ever lived in this world. Our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren live over and over. Will hear this, what we have done. I didn't want to believe it. And when I came to the resolution, I was then a young adolescent, that this was so, I joined in our high school a club that was called the Peace Club. You know, we were all going on to university. We were already enrolled in Heidelberg, going on to university. And that was our activity. No more wars. No more one person having all the power. You don't ever want this political system where one man holds too much power. So we sort of laid out a plan for ourselves. What we want. We'll fight any draft that comes our way. We demonstrate if something goes wrong in the city. University, we close them down. And that happened. Okay, it really did happen. We laid out a plan how we would fight any future elements that were still present. And there were a lot of young people who were committed to that. And they did, you know. You should have seen some of the universities in the early 60s. They closed them down. If something went wrong, a strike or anything, they closed them down and they marched on the behalf of whoever, you know. And when the draft was absolutely rejected, no one would go. I had a son of my cousin who was called in, and he had just completed his bachelor's and was already enrolled for his master's degree in engineering. He said, no. We, as the mothers, we worked on our kids, okay? And so his answer was, no, I will not go. So they put him in a hospital as an orderly. For 2 years he had it served. So he lost 2 years of university and started his master's later, but that was okay, because he believed in it. We believed in it. That massive thing that hit us, is that we cannot allow this to happen again. We have to fight that from the bottom up. And never stop fighting, because these elements always resurrect again. Everywhere. May not be in your own language, maybe in another language, but they're present. Because we are human. That's why they're present. So, but here, in little Germany, we'll make sure it won't repeat itself again. So, each university had its clubs, you know, fighting that. And then
Okay, I think Ms. Amato's class is, are you guys going to head back?
Yes, we'll be
Okay.
heading back. Thank
So-
you so very much, Mrs. Tolman. I really appreciate
yeah.
the wonderful stories that you told us. Thank
Okay.
you.
It was nice having you here.
And we're going to continue, so you're not in Ms. Amato's class.
Go over your tab.
So there's quite a few questions.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, people, about the end of the war or those kind of things? Yeah.
How was kind of like your community, like how was it impacted, how was it after the war?
Yeah, how was your community different after the war?
What I saw the community was kind of sad for a long time. They were very frightened, very frightened. We had a lot of people with nervous breakdowns. We had to build a lot of hospitals. There was a lot of breakdowns in the community. People overstressed and crashing. Okay. And when the war was over, with all the information coming in, I think there was too much. A lot of them crashed. Yeah. We didn't have too many civilians left. Then it was quite traumatic. Okay. So I had two uncles who were psychiatrists, and I remember visiting them, how overloaded they were. They worked 24 hours around the clock between their practice and the hospitals. And he said he had never seen it like that, ever. So their psychological impact was massive. People the average person did not want to face, did not want to believe them, did not want to be part of a race that is that murderous and that brutal. I think that was shame, guilt, collective guilt, which in Germany now, after all these years, is still with them. Will probably never totally go away. Never. Maybe in a couple of 100 years. You pay a price for things like that, okay? Yeah. But they are committed to keep war out from their border. They don't want to be involved, you know. They don't, you know. I hope and pray that they continue that. Let other people fight their wars. We have. For 2 World War, 100-year war in Europe, we've done our war. Let someone else do it. Kill their civilians. We don't want anything to do with it anymore. So I hope and pray that I have many relatives, younger relatives, that this continues in Germany. They're very active in other things, you know. But as far as military is concerned, most of them no. So maybe that was the legacy now to change the country, and politically it was changed. There is, you know, when I, during the negotiation with the EU, I saw a lot of Merkel, the present leader of Germany, and my first thought was, I wonder how long she will last. She's got too much power. This is the scenario, what I see now in Germany, that she may be replaced. She wields too much power, and that is something Germany doesn't want anymore. One person in control like that.
So if you have any general questions now, let's just open it right up to, it doesn't matter what period, just if you have any general questions. Yeah.
Do you know any like Jewish people who came back from the camps who were like part of your village?
Did you know people that were Jews that came back after?
Oh yeah, because their property, of course, was held in trust after the war. All the property they left behind were held in trust, and it was up to them to take it over again and stay, or if they wanted to leave, they got a reimbursement what the property was worth, you know, if they didn't want to come and work. We had one gentleman who had a huge store, and he said, I've built a store up in America, my kids are getting married over there, I want to go back, that's home now. So German government paid him several $1 million what his store was worth, you know, yeah, on the market, selling the store.
So
They came back, yeah.
Most didn't stay.
Most didn't stay, no.
Just too hard. Okay, Theo.
Did you or anybody you know report the Gestapo?
All good questions. Did you or anybody you know actually report anybody during the tense years during the war before? Now, did you go to the Gestapo or to detachment yourself?
I myself did not, but I know of people who did that. And within an hour, the person was gone. Never heard from him. Yeah. And there were no trial. No. Yeah. We basically, they had the Gestapo. They were not liked too much. People weren't too friendly to them. They had a camp there near in our village there, and I remember people didn't like him too much. Maybe because they knew that if they said the wrong thing or said anything, they would be turned in. They knew that about secret police. You know, they were everywhere. Everywhere.
Were you ever scared because like you weren't full German that you never be reported to this stuff?
Yeah, were you fearful because you weren't full German? Was that something that
Yeah.
constantly?
Yeah, and this is why I worked so hard. I felt maybe if I achieved at the highest level, I would not, you know, I would be safe. And I was. Yeah.
Did you ever experience like any hatred for wherever you were for having a German background?
Yeah. Did you ever experience discrimination when you came to North America after the war?
A little bit, you know, not much. And the discrimination was more going back for a visit, you know. Going back, I remember going back, you were not born then, taking your brother and my sister back, and we landed in Holland. And there was I had to wait there, and I didn't have my citizenship yet, so I traveled on a German passport. And I sat there with those 2 kids, and no one came and tried to help me. I was just sitting there. No one, you know, I was totally And there was a young black gentleman in an American uniform who came and said, "Do you need something?" And I said, "Yeah, no one." He said, "Never mind, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. What do you need?" And he, yeah, that's what I heard. That's what the first time. But over here, yeah, not much, no. Canada especially was very, we came early to Canada, you know, so stayed 5 years in the States and then Canada. No, Canada, no, it was great. Yeah, it was wonderful there.
Okay, Eddie, yeah.
When did you meet Mr. Sheldon?
Oh, when did you meet the son?
Okay, yeah, all right. Like so many of you probably I've gone through to from high school. Yeah, I want to go to university. I don't know when, I don't know what. I wouldn't mind traveling. You know, all those things. Oh, maybe I should work, you know, for a while and see. And then someone said, "Hey, why don't you work for the Americans? You can use your English, practice your English." I said, "Sure, why not?" So I went to work for what they call the finance department. And his father was there, and we met. So we dated, and eventually we married, and came to Seattle. Okay. Yeah.
Were you like taught like different languages for like as in the young maidens or whatever? Were you taught to speak different languages,
Yeah.
or were you just one?
Were you taught to speak other languages during the Nazi period, or was it only German? Did you?
No, we were taught. Okay, it was part of how could it benefit, again, the state. People were designated of what they should study. You were observed where you couldn't something, that's what you were, the state told you what to study. So if you wanted to be a lawyer, study criminology, be an agent or something like that. So, or be a doctor when you wanted to be a teacher because they felt you were suitable in this area. So you didn't have too much choice, but languages were always part of it because you could use them on the enemy. Okay. Listen into radio broadcast. You see, if you did understand the language, it could be of some use.
Yes, Sam first.
After you left Germany, was it hard to go back for like a visit?
Yeah. I was gone for 3 years when I first went back. And I remember we rented a house in Heidelberg. And you were there, you know. And God, the roads were so tiny, so small, everything was so small. I said, how could I have lived here? How could I breathe here? All these buildings and all these small roads. It was very hard. I had here all this wide open space. It was terrific, you know. And I was used to that and I loved it. So yeah, it was hard.
How about emotionally though, like in terms of
Mostly, yeah. It took a couple of months to get right back into it. I had moved away. And I think what made it so more pronounced that I had children over here. And I was involved with these children in gay baseball games and going to school. That was my life, okay, my world, okay. So I had this over here.
Curtis.
Were you told of like World War I? Did you know anything about it?
Very little, you know.
Well, probably you mean more like the Treaty of Versailles or just the war
Treaty of
itself?
Versailles.
Like Germany's like part in that war.
Yeah, like
Were you
what?
told or was that like hidden?
Yeah.
Because what were you told about in school, for example, about the First World War, about how Germany had been betrayed or
Yeah.
stabbed in the back?
Yeah, Germany had been betrayed, backstabbed, and the treaty has been designed to totally destroy Germany, you know, and to carve it up in pieces among the Allies. That's what, that's what you got emotional about that. You don't want your country to be carved up in a couple of pieces. Someone speaking French here, someone speaking Dutch here, someone speaking English here. That's not what you want, you know, you want the country together. So it was an emotional issue for many German people.
Do you know why the Treaty of Versailles was happening?
I just punch.
You mean at the time?
Yeah.
Well,
Or were they told by them?
I mean, we have to consider the Treaty of Versailles was the perfect scapegoat for
Yeah.
Hitler and the Nazis, because they could say, look at what they did to us.
Yeah,
They did ABC,
it was
we need to
perfect.
rectify that. So really, from a propaganda perspective, I think
Oh,
the
that's
Treaty of
terrific.
Versailles was the perfect event to exploit, and then Hitler and the Nazis exploited it beautifully.
That's when the Allies, they never thought about that. Nobody thought about that. And then, of course, it was too late. It could be used as a propaganda it worked. He even said it contributed to our unemployment. Can you imagine what this did to the people? They got even madder,
Any other questions? Theo?
How did this, like, the whole thing affect you as, like, a person?
Great question. How has all this experience up to the age of 12 shaped who you are today? What has it done?
Okay. I was involved. I always liked sort of helping out, okay, every way I could. And during the wartime, particularly during the air raids, when a lot of people lost their homes, I would help collect blankets and help getting to find utensils and clothing for the people who had lost everything. And I liked that. I really enjoyed doing that. And I did the same after the war when the eastern people from East Germany came to West Germany. There were so many, helping them to get settled, helping. So I liked the idea. The idea came in my school with the nuns, their influence. I could see how they were engaged with people, how they helped people, how they were encouraging, giving you visions, what to work by. I liked that. And I remember saying to one of my advisors, I would like to do something like that, where I could help people when they are in pain, and help them out and make them happy. And she said, then you keep your grades up, because for that you have to go to university. I remember her saying, keep your grades up. That requires a university education. Okay? 6, 7 years, and I did, so that was my aim. It influences. They were not directly war related. They were more from the after effect of the war, how I could help out.
Tell them what you did for a living. What did you do for a living in the 60s and 70s?
Oh, when I graduated?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, yeah, okay. I waited for a while until these guys were all a little older. I didn't want to go in to university when they were so young. So I went in full time, UWIC. I worked a little bit on the side, and I would always make sure I'd be home at 3 o'clock. He would come running home and say, are you there? Yeah, I'm there. Then he was gone again. But I made sure that I would be there. So I took only morning classes, and at night I studied. I was up every night until 2 o'clock. When I did my papers, I got up at 4:30 in the morning and prepare for the next class. I had 4 kids, and I was on my own then. So that's how I prepared myself in counseling. It wasn't easy. Financially, it was a little okay because I had a scholarship. So I didn't end up with this big, huge student loan. Everything was paid for. That made it a little easier for me. But it was very hard. But I would not give up. That's what I wanted to do. And as I graduated, I did some volunteer work. I had done some work in cross-cultural counseling, so I did some volunteer work in the ICA, and I got a call from a government agency who I sent a report in. It was volunteer work, but I made a report like if I was working, okay? And they saw the report, and they said, would you be interested? And it was mental health organization. Yeah, this is a government position. And I got hired. And I worked then for years for the government. Until I retired, and all in the helping profession. And I think it was very helpful because I did a lot of cross-cultural people who fled from very dangerous regimes and came over here as refugees. So I worked a lot with those families, helping the children and helping the families who were scared. I had things, and I could identify with. I had a woman with me, she couldn't sleep, she just couldn't sleep. And she said she couldn't sleep because it's too quiet here. No guns are going off. So I could empathize with her, we had to go. So it was quite a challenge for me, and I loved what I did.
What do you think of the Berlin Wall?
Yeah, I was already over here, but it was exciting. That's all that. And it was time, you know. It was time.
Well, no, she's talking about when the Berlin Wall came.
Oh, it's in the 60s.
Yeah,
When it came off?
When they built it in the 60s.
60s. Okay, what happened in East Germany? A lot of the professional people, doctors, lawyers left. We of course needed them. Germany had opened the university for 20 years, free, to train professionals. That's the only way, you know, they could afford to go. They said we cut off 20 years of tuition to train the doctors and lawyers and teachers because they were gone, you know, most of them. So, but from the east, a lot of them came across the border. So the East German government felt it was too big of a drain and lost of their own profession, and they built up the wall. Closed the whole thing off. And you, that, you couldn't get over there, you know, you were shot. You know, when you got it. Yeah. So yeah, that was one reason, you know, for losing a lot of their professional people. Drain of population. They all wanted to leave and come to the West. You know.
Have you ever visited any of the like concentration camps or sites like that?
No,
Have you ever visited any of the concentration camps?
no, I never have, no.
And when you were told about the Holocaust, because I know that if you were in Germany and you lived close to a camp at the end of the war, the Allies would march you through the camp and say, look what was happening in your backyard, you know. So
We were not close.
when you were close to
no.
the camp, so you were lucky, otherwise you would have had to walk
They
through
were
and
close.
do that.
I didn't believe it. I could not believe it. I said, this is not possible. This cannot be. But then my father, when he came back, and some of the relatives, he said, you don't know a lot what went on. We were out there in the front line. We saw the atrocities committed. There were atrocities by the enemy too. But I've seen enough to last me a lifetime. And that's what the whole idea came in, sent me to a special school. He said, he felt I would be totally warped if I grew up with that as an adult. It had to be addressed, it had to be worked on. Because all was a lie. You know, all was a lie. My whole life, up to the age of 11, was a lie. So, and suddenly suddenly I should switch over and say, oh no, now begin a new life. Wasn't that easy? I needed help. You hear, sometimes, I remember I did some teaching in Formosan, German. And I remember a father came to me once with his son. He said, you know, why are you here and not back home? You know, you're one of the professionals back home. I said, I'm married here, my kids, I love it here. And he said, did you hear all this garbage too about the Holocaust? Don't you know that is a lie? But I didn't know. I sat in the chair. I was ready to punch him in the mouth. And I said, no. I'm thinking that through quite rationally and try to give him a rational answer. I said, you know something? I would give anything if you were right. You know how much better that would be for me and for a lot of my fellow countrymen. You know we didn't do that. It's a lie. I think we all would want that. We all would want to believe that it's a lie. But unfortunately, it's not. And we have to live with it and deal with it. And I don't want to talk to you anymore. You have nothing to tell me. You weren't there. You don't know how it was. So don't tell me. I thought I would get fired. No, she said, no, don't worry. I kept on teaching Saturday school.
Okay, a couple more questions, Maddie?
Did anybody you know like not turn like stay like in the Nazi mind frame?
No.
Like did anyone continue to be like Nazis?
Right. So were there people in your community who continued to hold on to those values?
Some of them.
how did they get around it? Like, how?
They would say, they were what you call the Holocaust deniers. They said, maybe, have you ever thought about this? Can't be true. It's probably not true. They made it up because they wanted to punish us. We had to be punished, so that was one form of punishment to make us feel really lousy for the rest of our life. But there were a lot of people, particularly who came from the East. Some of the people who came from the East, where a lot of the camps were in Seen. And they said, forget it. But, you had someone over here, and I think that's what happened to that, was Kistler, was his name?
Yeah.
Now, his parents apparently came after 45. Was it Canada?
He was in Alberta.
Yeah, in Alberta. I am quite sure that he was only 3 years old, but he got the message throughout his life. I'm sure that his parents kept believing the message. The Holocaust was a lie and all was a lie. And they taught him that. That's how he grew up, okay? And then he taught that, tried to teach that to the kids. That some of the people continue to believe that, yeah. And taught their kids. But not too many, thanks God, not too many.
Okay, maybe one or two more questions. Anybody have any? Go ahead. Close enough.
In retrospect, what was your impression of Third Reich like when you were there?
In retrospect, have you rationalized it? That whole phenomenon.
I think he was a megalomaniac, what I call now. I can rationalize him from a professional point of view. He was a megalomaniac, he was insane. People who are I'm in human behavior, I'm a therapist, okay? To me, anyone who has this kind of a philosophy about human life, to murder anyone by the billions, by the millions, is insane. Insane. It's not, doesn't fit in the normal curve, just doesn't fit there. And what the biggest blame of the German people were with the people who surrounded him, they made the first attempt to try to blow him up. The question was, why didn't you interfere and get rid of him? You were around him, you knew what he was, we counted on you, too, not just Hitler. And then came the Nuremberg trial, and they were tried as accessory to murder. Okay? They were tried the same way as the actual killers. Because they were held accountable for not intervening and not doing something. So?
Okay, one last question? Who's got the last? Blake?
So when you won your medal for the event that you entered, and you met Hitler, and you made a comment towards you, did people treat you differently afterwards, or were you kind of treated?
Yeah.
Were you like a saint in your community or something? Like how
Yeah.
people?
Well, first of all, I participated in the provincial, so I was the only one in the community. They were kind of proud, I came back and I got a medal. Yeah, there was a distinct change in the attitude, yeah.
Towards you, because you've
Yeah,
acted
yeah.
physically now.
Yeah.
And we've talked about in history class, we've seen those images, Stalin or Hitler, whoever, even Mao for that matter, a little kid with a bouquet of flowers that presents the dictator with, she was one of those kids, so,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, did you give him flowers or something?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that seems like a good place to stop, so I want to thank everybody for being here and being good listeners and having great questions, and those of you that are in Miss Cullen's class, if you just head out the back, and the rest of you, well, there's only 10 minutes, so you may chat quietly amongst yourselves.
Yeah, nice meeting you all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
There we go.